The Radical. Fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, welcome everybody. Sorry about the background noise. You'd think I know how to set this up right after doing it 3,000 times, but I always forget something. So there was background noise because I forgot to mute the YouTube feed, which I get. So it was feeding back. All right, background noise is gone, and welcome everybody to the Yaron Brook Show on this. Today was muggy. It was a muggy, humid day here in Puerto Rico. At some point, like at 5 o'clock this afternoon, I was like, I haven't been out of this house for 3 days. I got to get out. So I went outside, was sitting by the water, and I noticed these cops approaching on their motorcycles. I was sure they were going to come and harass me for being outside, but luckily they drove by. They had somebody else they were going to harass. They left me alone. So I gotta get in a little, sitting by the ocean, a little walk, and experience the mugginess that is Puerto Rico right now. But other than that, a beautiful day. All right, let's see. What did I want to tell you today? We're back to talking about Corona. I'm waiting for when the news cycle shifts. I can't wait. I'm sick and tired of this topic. Would love to go on to talk about other things, but right now it still dominates, and there still really is a lot to do. Somebody wants me to simulcast live on Instagram. I mean, God, I'm simulcasting live on like 20, all these platforms, and another one. I don't know if Restream can easily stream to Instagram, I'll do it. If Restream can do it, then I won't do it. Very simple. So I'll check after the show, see if Restream can do it. I'm not adding any work. Anyway, we did 2 shows that were not coronavirus related, and I hope you really get a chance to watch them. I interviewed Bradley Thompson about his new book about the Founding Fathers and really about the Declaration of Independence, the philosophical foundations and for the Declaration and for the Revolutionary War. Fascinating conversation. Really encourage you to listen to it, and encourage you to go buy the book, of course. So that was on Sunday. That was Bradley Thompson. We talked about the Founding Fathers. We talked about the Declaration. We talked about the Enlightenment. We talked about the philosophers that impacted the founders. So it was a really, really good conversation, and I hope you have a chance to watch it. For whatever reason, the coronavirus shows get much more traction than I think the more interesting shows, which like that one. And then yesterday I talked to Don Watkins, another really good conversation. We talked about Mark Andreessen's essay on building, on the fact that America doesn't build anything and we need to start building stuff. And it was really fun. It was good. Don and I, of course, have written 3 books together. We've worked with each other. Don is terrific. I don't know about the beard that he grew, but other than that, he really is terrific. And, watch it. Go back to yesterday's show, watch the discussion with Don. It's a really, really important topic about progress, about why America doesn't build stuff anymore, and about Mark Andreessen's essay, which I thought was inspiring, but in my view, at least, quite flawed. So that is the issue. All right. Earlier today, I'll just fill you in on what I did. Earlier today, I did a debate on Skype with a leftist socialist economist, with David Pakman. David Pakman, you remember David Pakman was moderating. And you could say 2 against 1, but not really. David was pretty good. I thought he was a good moderator. I thought he did a good job. I thought the debate went really well. It's about an hour long. It'll come out probably on the weekend, but I'll definitely have more information about when that comes out. So I hope you I hope when it comes out, you see it, you share it, you get it out there. I think it'd be great for it to be shared with friends of yours who might not be capitalists, who might not be proponents of capitalism, who might be tempted by socialism. You can never debate socialists enough because, first of all, people like to watch the latest thing. They don't tend to go back and watch old stuff. And second, there's always new arguments. There's always a new case. There's always something new to bring up. I thought this debate was good, but different than other ones. And we keep doing this. That you cannot rest if you're an advocate for liberty, if you're an advocate for freedom, if you believe in capitalism. You cannot stop debating leftists, socialists, and of course rightists and fascists. You gotta constantly debate them all. We are alone in opposition. We are a tiny minority, and unless we go out and debate the opposition, we will not grow beyond that. Somebody asked, did I ever debate a religious conservative? I'm trying to think. I mean, I have. I don't think there's anything online that I can think of right now. I debated a religious conservative, but I have in various, I guess, forums that were not taped, debated religious conservatives. Ian asked, is this with Rob Lawson? How did you know that? Huh. I mean, Rob Lawson, I mean, he didn't act like a real socialist. He acted like a democratic socialist. So he didn't act, I mean, he was reasonable, and partially because we landed up debating mostly capitalism. But maybe that's a moderator. But yeah, I did debate Rob Lawson. So Rob Lawson, the economist. So yeah, it should be good. Oh, that's right. I did talk to Ben Shapiro. He's a religious conservative, but we didn't really debate. We had a conversation. It was an interview. He interviewed me. When somebody interviews you, it's not a debate. A debate is when you go up against somebody and there's a moderator usually for debates. So I wouldn't consider what I did with Ben Shapiro a debate. I'd love to debate Ben Shapiro. That would be fun. And if anybody out there wants to arrange a debate, would love to do it. I'd love to. There are a lot of, religious conservatives I'd love to debate. So, make a list and make it happen. Make it happen. Dennis Prager, what's his name? Anybody on Fox? Any of those guys on Fox? All right. So today I'm going to vent my frustrations. I always do that, but today I'm going to do that. Gail says, I would love to see debate a neocon fascist. The neocons, most of the neocons I don't consider fascist. They lead to fascism, but I don't consider the neocons fascists themselves. Oh, we'll get Sullivan. That's right. I just did Andrew Sullivan. What am I thinking? I debated Andrew Sullivan, who's a religious conservative. That's on my channel. You can find it. Just do Yaron Brook, Andrew Sullivan. I thought it was a really good debate. We got into religion. So yes, it was supposed to be a conversation. It landed up being a debate. I would love to debate a neocon. I don't consider them fascists. Actually, these days, because they're so anti-Trump, I feel like they're somewhat allies. But I would love to debate them because they're wrong on so many different things, philosophically and policy-wise. So yes, that would be another great debate. But yeah, I debated a religious conservative. How did I miss that? It was recently. It was like in March, in the midst of Corona. I was in Clemson University and did that debate. So you can find that on my website and on the Clemson Capitalism, the Clemson Institute for Capitalism as well. Yeah, Mark says it's easier for you to find common ground with conservatives and liberals. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Watch the debate with Sullivan. What was the common ground there? There was very little in the end. And on the most fundamental issue, metaphysics or epistemology or aesthetics or morality, we had no common ground. And even when it came to capitalism, we had no common ground. So we literally had no common ground. With some liberals, let's say somebody like Sam Harris or somebody like Steven Pinker, I would probably find more common ground than I would with conservatives, because at least we'd have a respect for science, a respect for reason, a respect for the Enlightenment. And then we disagree on ethics and we disagree on politics, but I disagree with ethics and politics and economics with conservatives as well. So anyway, I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about the lack of objectivity in the coronavirus debate, and it's kind of driving me crazy. So I'm going to vent a little bit and just hopefully you find it entertaining, more importantly, maybe a little educational. But yeah, I mean, on every single aspect of this crisis, event, whatever you want to call it, on almost every single aspect of it, on every single dimension of it, I find myself battling people who are being non-objective. And it's even just in the numbers. Nobody can agree on the numbers. But it's okay to say, and I've said this many, many times on the show, and I wish it was sticking more, and I wish I could see some impact out there in Twitter land and in Facebook land. When you don't know something, or put it this way, be objective about what you know and you don't know. So there are people out there pounding the pavement and pounding the table. This is just like the flu, less than the flu. Even if that's true, you don't know it's true. And then there are people out there saying, this is the end of the world. People dropping like flies. The rate of death is 3-4%. Even if that turned out to be true, you don't know that is true. Nobody knows right now what the exact death rate is. And all the attempts to estimate it and figure it out are just that, attempts, approximations. And much of it based on massively flawed data. And I've talked about the flawed data over and over again. And I'll talk about it a little bit more when we talk about testing. But it's just horrific to me that people refuse to acknowledge, and it's okay to say, I don't know. And I may be guilty of this as well. Maybe sometimes I make assertions about stuff that I'm overly confident when my level of confidence shouldn't be as high because I don't really know. But I try. And I try to correct when I make a mistake, and I try to hold back. But look, the objective evidence to the best of our knowledge right now is that this virus is significantly worse than the flu. Now, let me explain what's significantly worse than the flu. My understanding is the flu is about 0.1% mortality rate. Significantly worse would be double the mortality rate. If double the people die, then it's significantly worse. So 0.2 would be significantly worse. My best guess, and estimate guess, and it's an estimate guess based on my analysis of the data, and let me just tell you, and I'm not I'm not claiming to be an expert, but statistics is something I've really studied. I mean, I took lots of classes in econometrics and statistics. I'm a finance professor. I've written papers about statistics. I run econometric models. I don't remember all the details because it was a long time ago, and although I still evaluate statistical models. So I'm not a world-class expert. I'm not close to being a world-class expert. But I know some basic math and know some basic stats. But I'm not an expert in this field. I'm just looking at the data that seems to be available that I've looked at and so on. My estimate right now is that this is about, if the flu is really 0.1 mortality rate, this is probably 4 to 6 times worse than the flu. Now, that's a lot. So death rates are probably somewhere around 0.4 to 0.6 of the people who got it. Not of the people who tested, of the people who actually have it. That is my estimate right now. It's certainly, now, so it's not 3 to 4 probably. It's certainly not 0.1, and there's strong evidence it's not 0.1. It's high. And then, of course, we know with pretty strong evidence and close to certainty as you're going to get, that certain people are more susceptible to this. That is, death rates among old people are much, much, much higher than death rates among young people. And we've gone over this. That doesn't mean young people don't die of this. But it means that their death is rare. Statistically small probability, which means you don't structure a whole society around their deaths. So if you can prevent old people from dying from this, you take away much of the sting, much of the damage that is done from this virus. And then, of course, it's also true that people who have pre-existing conditions are susceptible. But it's doubly true that people who have pre-existing conditions and are old are more susceptible. If you could just if you could just isolate old people, and we'll get to the complexities of actually doing that, then you drop the mortality rate dramatically. Dramatically. So I'm sick of tired of people telling me, people who have never taken a statistics class, who can barely do math based on just some of their tweets, telling me that they know what the mortality rate is. Nobody knows, including world expert statisticians and including world expert epidemiologists. They don't know. They don't know. But we can confidently say that it's significantly greater than the flu, but less than the numbers being reported now because of the lack of testing. So less than the 3-4% that has been reported. Probably less than 1, but I wouldn't be shocked if it turned out to be greater than 1. And again, not evenly spread across populations. So which population matters? So the prevalence, then let's get to the prevalence. How many people actually have this? Right? It's not everybody who's tested positive because we haven't done many tests. We haven't done many tests. So we don't know how many people actually have it. Now, some scientists have gone out and done random samples, or somewhat random, not really random, somewhat random samples in, I know, Santa Clara, I think there's one in LA County, there's some others around the country, and they take a sample of a few hundred and they extrapolate from that, and they use all kind of statistical methodology to expand and extrapolate that to the general population. And I have seen people come out with, well, here we go. So Santa Clara County has this number, and then extrapolate to the United States, and they say, this is how many people have the disease. Which is, again, completely amateuristic, completely, silly, and non-objective. Many of these samples, it's difficult to extrapolate real, statistically meaningful results. Error, the error rate is still relatively high in these tests. To get statistical, meaningful, valid numbers is really, really hard. And every one of these studies that I've seen that have come out has been immediately followed by statisticians, pros, people who really know what they're doing, critiquing the study. Now, that doesn't mean the study is meaningless. It just means you can't jump on the first study and quote it and it's all done. They're going to have to be many studies. The sample sizes are going to have to grow. The researchers are going to have to learn that some of their methodology does not produce actual random samples. A sample in Santa Clara might not result in the same thing as a sample in Ohio. We're going to have to do varied samples across many geographies, across many population densities, across many population behaviors, until we actually get a sense, and we'll never know exactly, a sense of how many people actually have, or actually had at some point, the virus. And given that our testing regimes have been so pathetic, that the United States has done so few tests per capita, and that serological tests are still just in the infancy in terms of coming out, and that the error rates are still relatively high. I understand that they have 1.5% false positives. Well, when you only get 5% positives, and 1.5% might be false, and you've got a band of error even around that, that does not really give you, a confidence in the results. So it's just, read all these studies. That's great. But just don't fall into the trap that because a bunch of scientists did it, it must be true. Most of it is not. Or most of it's partially true. Or true in a particular context. And often these studies ignore the context. Somebody says my educational credentials are super impressive. Maybe. I mean, looking back, they're not bad, but at the time, I just was doing what I enjoyed doing. For those of you who don't know, I've got a BA in engineering, civil engineering from the Israel Institute of Technology, and I've got an MBA and then a PhD in finance from the University of Texas in Austin. And I was a finance professor for 7 years and wrote papers that are still being cited in the academic literature and that are published in some of the top finance journals in the world. But that gives me no credentials with regard to coronavirus. That I have to learn, that I have to study. And at the end of the day, I'm not an immunologist, so don't take that. But I do know something about statistics, but I'm not an expert even there. So everything I'm saying is we'll have an approximation because that's the reality. We won't know for certain. Or I won't know for certain. I can predict for certain. Maybe some others. The other thing is I see these videos of experts. They bring out an immunologist with great CV. And they'll say something with great confidence. And then, the same day, you'll get another video with somebody with just as good of credentials saying the exact opposite. Now, when you get that, when you start seeing this as a pattern, as a layman, which to some extent I consider myself, I go, so they don't really know. They don't really know. So it just reduces my level of confidence in what I'm hearing, in what I'm integrating, and I'm just more wary of making definitive statements. Although, as you know, I make plenty of definitive statements. I should probably, I'm cautioning you now. So we don't even know how many people have it. And we're not going to know for a long time how many people have it and how many people had it. So there's no way we know what the mortality rates are. We don't even know how many people really died of coronavirus. I mean, it's that bad. In Puerto Rico here, over the weekend, the guy responsible for the health ministry or whatever it's called here said, we think we double counted some of the deaths. But you know what? We're not sure. I'll get back to you guys. It's 5 days later. We still don't know if they double counted, how much they double counted. Yeah, somebody recommends Greg Salamiri's lectures on objectivity and science. I highly recommend them. They're really, really good, and they give you the kind of tools, philosophically at least, to be an objective consumer of science. I'm trying to apply those tools here as we speak. So, for example, everybody says, oh, they're undercounting. No, they're overcounting. Well, how do any of you know? When was the last time you went to a morgue? When was the last time you talked, not Fox, not CNN, not MSNBC, or the New York Times, or anybody. When was the last time you, or somebody you know personally that you trust, talked to a medical examiner who assigned deaths to patients? How do you know these things are political? They might be, but how do you know that? So a lot of complaints about some cases are being attributed to coronavirus when the person wasn't tested, but they died and they had certain symptoms of coronavirus. Right. That's true. We know that. If you go to the New York website, they actually have two columns. One column of people who were tested and died and people that they suspect died from coronavirus. So if you're suspicious, you can pull the numbers out. The numbers are not being hidden from you. But there's less discussion about people who are dying in old age homes, people who are dying in their homes, probably from coronavirus, but who have not been tested. And they might be undercounted. So again, we don't even know exactly, we know, I think approximately, but not exactly, how many people have actually died and actually died of corona. Now, my view is we won't know this until a year from now, let's say, and we'll look back and we'll say from March till June or whatever, X number of people died in set geographic area in 2020. And then we'll compare that number to numbers from 2019, 2018, 2017, maybe the average over the last 10 years. And we'll say, was it higher or was it lower? And we'll attribute the fact that it's higher, which I think it will be, it already is, to coronavirus. And at that point, we'll know it's 25% higher. It's double, like it turns out it was in March in Italy. And then you'll have the actual number of, let's say, above normal deaths. And people will still say, oh, it wasn't corona, it was some other virus, some other disease. People always find an excuse not to believe the data. But then we'll have a reasonable assessment of how deadly this was and how much outside of the norm it constituted. I mean, we'll actually probably have this data soon. There's a project for The Economist magazine where they're doing this country by country. And you can see, if you go to The Economist magazine, I think you need a subscription, unfortunately, which I don't have. But I got like a trial on this article. And they're actually showing graphs of kind of normal death over the last decade and then what happened in March. And you're seeing the increased deaths in March. And this is, again, why I say this is just not the flu. This is above and beyond the flu. How much above and beyond the flu? As I said before, nobody knows. Some other errors people are making. People tend to have a bias towards their own experience, which is completely understandable. But when it comes to a global phenomena, you can't just extrapolate from what's going on in your neighborhood. So look, this virus is unbelievably deadly in New York. I think the numbers for New York are going to be very, very high, particularly in New York City. Not just the numbers of infected, but the mortality rate, I think, at the end of the day, is going to be really high. I mean, right now, not of infected, of the total population of New York City, and I haven't run the numbers today, so I'm not sure what it is, but it's 0.15% of the total population of New York City has died from coronavirus. More from the flu of the total population, not just the infected, right? When we say it's 0.1 from the flu, we say it's 0.1 from people who had the flu. Here it's 0.15 of all the people that live in New York City. That's a big number. So if it turns out that only 20% of New Yorkers have it, then it will turn out, and we're not finished yet, it's going to end up at being 2.2 or whatever, or 0.3 of the total population of New York. If it's 0.2, then, and if it turns out that only the 20% of New Yorkers have it, then we get to 1% of all people who had coronavirus in New York died. We don't know that yet. We don't know how many people in New York City have it. But it's reasonable to assume 20%, maybe 40% had it, and then it's only 0.5 the mortality rate. Right? It makes a big difference to the numbers. But New York, and if you live in New York, as I know a lot of you do, this is horrific. This is really, really, I mean, you know people who've died, your neighbors, people, relatives, friends, relatives of friends. I mean, this is a significant number. It's not a small number. And it's particularly in Queens and in Brooklyn and in the Bronx. And you could argue, again, speculation, we don't know. Public transportation, everybody in those areas goes into Manhattan using the subway. Could be in the subway system. It could be that there's a heavier load of the virus because of repeated exposure in the subway. I don't know. Nobody does. But the fact is, New York City, if you look at the New York City numbers, they are really, really, really bad. And it's a significant percentage. And if you live in New York City, it looks as bad as one can imagine. But it's not New York City everywhere. Other cities around the country don't have extensive public transportation. Maybe they don't have as many poor people. Maybe they don't have as many multi-generational people. Maybe the people in these other cities are healthier. Maybe people in these other cities, whatever, I don't know. But the fact is that the New York experience is not the experience of even San Francisco, another city, or LA. and certainly not of Salt Lake City or Phoenix or Scottsdale, where population is more dispersed, living in homes, social distancing is more natural. So, you know, we can't tell. Weather might play a role. I don't know that it does. Again, I don't know. I hope it does. I hope this is seasonal, but we don't know yet. It seemed, I mean, again, my suspicions are it is. If you look even at Singapore, we now have a spike in cases in Singapore. But all those cases are, almost all those cases, I think 75% of the new cases identified in Singapore are migrant workers who came in from Malaysia, who knows where they got it. But the weather in Singapore probably makes human-to-human transmission less, not zero, never will be zero, but less because of the humidity and the heat. The reason humidity matters is when you spit this stuff out, the water particles in the air latch onto the fat surrounding the virus, and it drops to the ground faster. In dry air, it stays afloat. Again, not confirmed, not absolute, but a suspicion. A good reason why it would be seasonal, related maybe to humidity more than to heat. Not much in Mexico City. Nowhere near as bad as New York City. Nowhere near as bad as a lot of the United States at all. Mexico has a relatively low death rate from this. I suspect weather has something to do with it. I also suspect age of population has something to do with it. I also suspect entry point, where at entry point with which population it enters has something to do with it. So if you live, you know, I don't know, on a, you know, if you live in Boise, Idaho, and the rate of infection is very low and the rate of death is very, very low, and the hospitals are empty and nothing's really happening, and I don't know if that's the case in Boise, but I haven't heard Boise in the news, so I assume it is. Don't assume that that's the case everywhere else in the United States. You actually have to look at the data. Now, somebody says Mexico is not testing. That's true, but have you seen a spike in deaths in Mexico? And I don't think we have. Again, I don't know, but the data I've seen, we just haven't seen that spike in deaths in Mexico that we have in other countries. So not even corona-related death, just total deaths. Have those gone up significantly in Mexico? So let's say non-violent death from disease. I don't think so. So there's reason to believe Mexico doesn't have a lot of deaths from coronavirus for whatever reason. To be studied, to be figured out. Admit you don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows with certainty. We have suspicions. We have data. We have information. We have suggestions. We have indications. We don't have certainty, so stop behaving like you do. So don't extrapolate from your location to all other locations. I've seen this. People in some parts of America saying, oh, New York, it's fake numbers. Really? You want to tell that to the emergency room doctors in New York City? You want to tell that to people who've lost people they know? You want to tell that to the actual, when you actually look at the numbers? No. New York is different than where you live. Why is that so hard to imagine? So, again, be objective. Be objective about what you know and what you don't know. Be objective about the numbers. Look carefully. Not every county is the same. Not every city is the same. Not every state is the same. Not every city, county, state has responded in the same way. And remember, the death rates in New York are in spite of the fact the place has been in lockdown. Same with regard to treatment. I mean, this drives me crazy. So Donald Trump, who has I think, a PhD in immunology and is a MD, right, a medical doctor, has made a recommendation about a treatment. Now, I don't know if the treatment's any good or not. From what I can see as a layman, there are anecdotal reports that it works. There's some semi-scientific studies that show that it works. Then there's other anecdotal evidence that shows that it doesn't work. And again, semi-scientific studies that show that it doesn't work. A lot of the evidence that show it does work, it's when it's treated, when it's not people are not in their deathbed. But part of the problem is since you don't have a placebo, you don't have a control group, how do you know they wouldn't recover it anyway? And it's just amazing to me. So we don't know. Maybe it was, some doctors are using it because they're convinced it works. Some doctors will not use it. Will not use it. Right? Yeah, Mark just cited an LA Times report saying Mexican officials are warning that there's going to be a major surge in infections and deaths. And that could be, right? Timing. I don't know the weather matters. Actually, and Mexico City is not that hot necessarily. But it could be the weather doesn't matter. And Mexico City is just behind. And we're going to get a surge soon. Right? The point is, it's easy to look at data and not think about, well, what's coming? What's happened? What are the issues? We'll see. We'll see if the weather thing is right or wrong. I hope it is, because that means we'll get a break in the summer. But and I also looking at countries like Vietnam and Thailand and Indonesia and Malaysia and Singapore, you're seeing less prevalent, even though they've had the virus there for a longer period of time than here. Yeah, Guayaquil in Ecuador seems to be a counter to the issue of humid and hot, because Guayaquil, man, that place is one of the most humid places I've ever been to. And the story in Guayaquil is that so many people are dying of coronavirus that the hospitals can't admit them, and they're literally bodies in the street. And it is truly spooky. Now, again, I think we're going to have to give some time, and people will study it and find out what happened in Guayaquil. Because why is it happening in Guayaquil and not in Quito? And why is it happening in Guayaquil and not in Colombia or not in Chile and other places? What made the Guayaquil situation so much worse than anywhere else? So again, there's so much we don't know about this virus. There's so much we don't know about the virus. Luis said Ecuador is really bad. It's mainly Guayaquil, from my understanding. I don't think the same thing is going on in Quito, but I don't know. I mean, literally, they say bodies in the streets and bodies kind of being thrown into the ocean because they're not burying them. So again, these are stories I read. I don't know if they're true. I don't know how true they are. But the important thing is how much we don't know. So the treatments, they're probably, I don't know, I'm guessing 10, 20, 30 different drugs being tried right now. Many of them, there are no clinical trials because nobody has the time to do a clinical trial. Also, a clinical trial requires a placebo. Many people don't want to run trials with placebos when people are dying. They just want to try stuff on them. But I see so many people on Facebook who have no medical qualifications, who have no knowledge of these things, any of this stuff, making assertions. And they cite the reports they like. And I like to post as much as I can. Here's something that these guys say it works. Here's something people don't say it works. Just studies. They tend to be scientific studies. But they're not equally good. And some of them might be really bad. But immediately, if it's a study people disagree with, then immediately, but they didn't put zinc in the combination. All right. And that matters. Another study said it did. These guys say, how do we know? These are doctors. And I'm sure doctors are ignorant of this. So, as well, they have their biases. Until we run proper scientific studies, or we get large enough cohorts that we can see that there seems to be something that's working and something that's not. The ideal is a double-blind study, but you might not be able to do that, but you might be able to. Then stop it. Stop it. Both if you're president of the United States and if you're just one of us. I mean, I hope they all work. Obviously, they're not, because people are dying. A lot of people are dying. By the way, this malaria drug that the president touted, thousands of people doctors all over the country are trying it. All over the world are trying it. And yet, thousands and thousands of people are dying. So it's not a miracle cure, even if it works at the margin on some patients. So you gotta run trials. And it's true, some trials don't need placebos. But if you don't have a placebo, you better have numbers. You better have size to get any kind of statistical, any kind of real solutions. And even then, you also need to know the causal mechanisms. And we still don't know. There's so much about the virus we don't know. I mean, today I read a story that some people are dying from weird blood clots caused by corona. And they don't yet understand why. So it's not always that the lungs get affected. It's the kidneys. We've heard a lot about that the immune system overreacts, and part of the treatment is to calm down the immune system. Is that true in all cases? There's so much to know. There's so much to be studied, and people are going to be studied this for in the months to come and in the years to come. To assert certainty about your knowledge is foolish. It's foolish and unobjective. It's not objective. Fanny, I see you on here. My assistant is supposed to contact you to set up the interview, so we will do it. We will get it done. That was, so treatments, all kinds of treatments. You know, it turned out in the early days, everybody went on a ventilator. The ventilators weren't helping. It turned out that sometimes if you roll the patient on their stomach, again, this is what I'm reading, on their stomach, that helped because it shifted kind of which part of the lungs was being activated and oxygen being absorbed or whatever, right? And it turned out that the pressure, people are learning on the fly. People are figuring out this on the fly. But we, the armchair doctors in our living rooms, playing on Facebook, we know how to treat this disease. We have absolute, unquestioned knowledge about this, right? Get a life, people. Stop pretending you know stuff you don't know. And of course, it's all political now, right? So as soon as you post something that goes against the president's advice, he says it comes out fake news. So I posted a thing about how Sweden is doing fairly well. The death numbers are significantly higher than its neighbors in Norway, but lowers the percentage of the population in Great Britain or I think even the United States. Maybe higher than the United States, but lower than Italy, Spain, France, and Great Britain. But it's given that they've done none of the forced isolation, the lockdown, it seems like they're doing pretty well. Where somebody posts fake news. Why? Because the president, Trump, in one of his press conferences said, oh no, Sweden is a disaster. It's horrible. They're being crushed. We're much better than Sweden. So now that becomes truth. The truth. Capital T, capital. The truth. And when you post something saying, no, Sweden's actually doing pretty well. Okay, it can't be true. The president said something different. This is the Trump lobotomized syndrome, right? These are the Trump fans that have been lobotomized and can't think for themselves and just use Trump instead of the Bible as the source of all knowledge and all truth. So we don't, read about Sweden. And the other thing about Sweden is we don't yet know. It's still early. And we don't know what's going to happen in Norway, Denmark, and Finland. Death rates over there are much lower than Sweden right now, even controlled for size of population. But the fact is, the whole idea of flattening the curve is to flatten the curve. It's not to reduce the number of people who die. It's to reduce the number of people who die at any given point in time so that the hospitals don't get overloaded. So it could very well be that Norway and Denmark and Finland right now have low death rates because they flatten the curve to reduce stress on their hospitals. But when they ultimately open up the economies, something they have to do, they will have a continuation of deaths well into the future, where Sweden will get over this much faster with more deaths. But it's so hard to tell. I would have expected a resurgence of the virus in China, significant revert, and it hasn't occurred. So it's hard to tell why. I would have expected more and more cases in South Korea, and it hasn't happened. So there's something going on here, a lot going on here, that we just don't understand and don't know, that have to do with the characteristics of the virus and characteristics of the population. And there's this discussion about herd immunity, again. But South Korea never reached herd immunity, and yet they seem to be doing fine. Sweden, I think, is moving in a direction of herd immunity, although, again, some of the information about Sweden is false. The fact is, most people in Sweden are self-isolating. Most people in Sweden don't go out. Sweden, before the crisis, had the most people per capita working from home of any other Western country. So work from home for them was normal. So Sweden has taken significant voluntary measures to deal with social distancing. So will they reach herd immunity if they social distance, even voluntarily? Right? Now, by the way, Sweden is doing reasonably well, not because they're flaunting everything and they're just going out and partying, but because they're doing social distancing. And the places where, it's interesting, the places where Sweden is not doing well are two places. One, they did not do a good job of isolating, insulating, cocooning the elderly. So old age homes is where a lot of the Swedes' deaths are coming from. They didn't do a good job of locking those down. And then another place where Sweden is struggling is with its immigrant population. Remember all the immigrants, the Muslim immigrants that came in there? I don't think it's quite 10%, but maybe somewhere between 5 and 10% of the Swedish population are new immigrants from the Middle East, from Somalia, from places like that. And they don't socially distance voluntarily. And many of the instructions were not translated into a language they understand. And in those households, you often have multi-generational households, which you do not have among Swedes, original Swedes, non-Muslim Swedes. So that population, you got higher death rates. So again, you have to break it down. You have to figure out what's working where, and why is it not working where it's not working. You can't just make blanket statements. Right? So you actually have to dig. I think ultimately we're either going to get a vaccine or get herd immunity. There is no real option unless it turns out that this virus somehow dies out. I don't think it does. I don't think that is something that occurs typically. But again, I'm a little bewildered, and I'm curious to ask an immunologist what's going on in places like South Korea and China. Why aren't you seeing a resurgence? And next time I have Amesh Adolja on the show, I'll ask him, and we'll try to figure that out. Let's see. So that is that. Everything about this is politicized, and it's pathetic. Pathetic. Then I saw one other comment about this. And this maybe is a comment about me. I don't know if it was referred to me or not, but this is the comment. The comment was, you can't just say isolate the old and the what do you call it? People with pre-existing medical conditions. Because that's a huge percentage of the population, particularly pre-existing medical conditions. For example, if you open up the economy and you say we're going to isolate the old, well, what about obese parents? And their children now go to school because you've opened up the economy, and they bring back the virus and they infect the parents. And that's true. And I have two comments on that. One is, there's no way to solve every one of those problems. But the solution cannot be to lock down everybody pretty much indefinitely, given the behavior of the virus. At some point, you have to open up. And I believe strongly we should have never locked up most of the country. Certain places like New York should have, but most of the country should have never been locked up. Because we should have done massive quantities of testing and isolating, cocooning the vulnerable. I can't give you the script on how every sensitive group, every the word is slipping me. Every group that is susceptible to this should be dealt with. I can say, I've said this many times. What I say is, old age homes should be locked. People who work at old age homes should be tested, and adhere to the most strict hygiene requirements. Second, vulnerable. Thank you. Vulnerable was the word that escaped me. Second, if you live in a multi-generational family, you should try to find a way to get the older person out of the home, isolated somewhere. And I've said this before. If the government is going to spend 2.2, no, not 2.2, they just passed another 500 billion. So 2.7 trillion. God, I get shivers just thinking of that number. $2.7 trillion of a stimulus package. Suddenly they could take a few billion and use that money to facilitate isolation of old people, providing them with Uber Eats, whatever you need to do, right? So first get everybody over 70 out of the equation. Find ways to do it. Will some people slip through the cracks? Absolutely. Will some people die? Absolutely. Death is a risk we all take by living. And I can't guarantee, and nobody can guarantee, and nobody should try to guarantee, that you have a methodology where nobody dies from the virus. People are going to die. Then what happens to obese people and people with diabetes? Well, first, if they're under the age of 60, they have a higher probability of dying than the rest of us, but it's not massive. It's higher than anybody would like, but it's not like if you're over 75 and have this, where the death rate is 15, 20% sometimes. So they're going to have to take the risk. And if that means a higher death rate, then it does mean a higher death rate. You cannot basically require everybody to sacrifice their lives because there is some subgroup that you can't figure out how to protect. And it's sad, but that's the reality. And hopefully, if you isolate the most vulnerable, people who have pre-existing conditions and they're old, and you do that by isolating everybody who's old, then you reduce the load on the hospitals dramatically, and hopefully, as over time we develop treatments and we can save a lot of the people that land up going to hospital that are not very old and who have these pre-existing conditions. But again, the attempt at perfection, and we can't open up until we have perfection, is insane. So I think things should be opened up, other than in a few hot spots that need to be identified as hot spots. I think opening up doesn't mean returning to normal. I don't think anybody should think about returning to normal. You shouldn't be shaking hands. You should be keeping a distance. You should be working from home to the extent that you can. If you go to restaurants that have big spacing within the restaurant. If you run a restaurant, run it at the highest hygiene level possible. If you run it, I get emails from hotels all the time that they're now cleaning the rooms as if they were hospital rooms. They're using much more powerful disinfectants. They're using much more powerful cleaning. That's the response of business. That's the response of capitalism. So you got to open and at the same time ramp up protection, ramp up caution, take personal responsibility over your own life, and do what you can to protect yourself from this virus. But that's a big difference from that to forcing people. All right. Georgia, by the way, I thought announced an opening up, which seems very reasonable to me, seems right, seems the appropriate thing to do. Leave it to people to decide on the risks that they take. I don't know what they're doing with old people, so that was a part of it I didn't really see. But I do think some resources need to be allocated to thinking about how to protect old people. But if you want to go get your hair cut and you're young and healthy and the barber's young and healthy, then go for it. And if you want to go to a restaurant, can't wait. I can't tell you. One of the things I miss the most is going to restaurants. Now, what's interesting about Georgia is that Trump has now withdrawn his support for the governor's actions. So you will see a big backlash against Georgia because, again, what Trump says is God. So Trump has withdrawn his support for what happens in Georgia. But look, even if Georgia deaths increase, we're not in the business of eliminating death. We're in the business, the government should be in the business, of identifying threats, isolating the threat. And what Georgia should do and everybody should do is massive, massive test, track, isolate, test, track, isolate, test, track, isolate. But they can't. Well, they can't shut me down. They can't stop my life because they're a bunch of incompetent fools. I'm sorry. It's just not right. It's just not right. And I think it's the right thing to do. I don't think it's some kind of economic imperative because this is not about economics. There is no such thing as the economy. The economy is life. That's what economy is. Economy is what we do to live, work, produce, consume, live. So opening up the economy is opening up life. You can't separate economics from living. Economic activity is the most important activity each one of us as an individual engages in life. It's what sustains our life. So the economy, in other words, our lives need to be opened up. Now it needs to be done in a responsible way. Businesses need to behave responsibly. Individuals need to behave responsibly. And government needs to get its frigging act together. I said frigging. Am I allowed to do that? And start testing, which I've been saying because I learned from Amish Adalja. I've been saying it for 2 months. No, 3, from January, when I first heard about this. Test, test, test. I have no influence in this world. On that scale, anyway. Oh my God, Rob says he's going to drive from Florida to Georgia just to go to a restaurant. I'm tempted to get on a flight. I'll have to look to see if I can get a good price on an airplane ride from Puerto Rico to Atlanta. You know, go to some restaurant, spend the night, and fly back. I kind of miss airports anyway, so and airplanes and hotel rooms anyway. So maybe I need to get a fix. All right, let's take some super chat questions. Super chat's been quiet today. I don't know what happened. Are the lockdown protests helping or hurting? I actually think they're hurting because I think they're being done badly and they're politicized. It's all about Trump. It's all, drop it. Trump is against opening up. He's against what Georgia's doing. So stop making this about Trump. And the other thing that makes it irresponsible is the not socially distancing. Now, there was a protest in Israel. I don't know if you've seen this. It was a protest against Benjamin Netanyahu. I wish I was in Israel. I would have joined the protest. I'm very much opposed to Netanyahu. Anyway, the protesters, thousands of them, stood in the street 6 feet from one another. It was this mass of people standing 6 feet from one another. So they took up a huge geographic area, so it looks much bigger. And they did it respectfully. They didn't jam up against one another. They weren't yelling. They weren't shouting. You can stand there with the "Don't Tread on Me" signs. You can stand there with the American flag. I wish you didn't bring all your Trump paraphernalia because Trump doesn't even really support you. Or he does yesterday and he doesn't today and he will tomorrow and he won't in 3 days. He's too busy. Closing the borders to immigrants, to legal immigrants. For those of you who didn't believe me when I said Trump was anti-legal immigration, he just proved the extent to which he's anti-legal immigration. He just banned it for 60 days. So I think the kind of protests, are not helpful. I think if they were done respectfully, if they were done with respect to the virus, that is saying we acknowledge that this is deadly. We acknowledge that social distancing is good. what we reject, what we resent, is the coercive measures that the government has inflicted on us, then I think you get a good thing. Somebody says you ought to get on Tucker Carlson. I mean, Amy, you know, great that she got on, and Tucker likes Amy, but Tucker will never have me on. I can guarantee that. Look, Fox has basically banned me. They basically told me they banned me years ago. I used to be on all the Fox shows. I used to be on Bill O'Reilly and on Neil Cavuto and Stasso when he had a show there, and Napolitano when he had a show there, and many, many other shows on Fox. I used to be on Fox Business every single week, at least once, sometimes twice, in 2008 and 2009. And when I refused to endorse a Republican candidate for president, Fox basically said, you're not welcome anymore, here anymore. And when in 2016, when I refused to embrace any Republican, that is, I said I run a nonprofit, I don't endorse anybody. Oh, I used to do Glenn Beck on Fox. Then Fox basically said, we're not interested in you. And I'm on a ban list, and of all the people, I think Tucker would never have me on. I just don't believe it. I hope he has Amy on more often, because Amy does a good job on Tucker, but he wouldn't have me on. Oh wait, that was one lockdown. Why are property rights essential to freedom? Wow, that's a big one. Well, freedom comes before property rights. Property rights are an aspect of freedom. Think of freedom this way. What does freedom mean? Freedom means the absence of coercion. Freedom means that you have the right to pursue your values rationally, free of coercion, free of force, free of authority. Now, what does that mean, to pursue your values? That includes to cultivate the land, to build a factory, to earn a living. And that is now yours. And free of coercion means nobody can take it away from you. And property rights are recognition that you need material things in order to survive. You need material things in order to live. You need to be able to pursue those material things. And that if you create those material things, they're yours. So property rights are an aspect of the right to life. They're not a primary. They're an aspect of the right to life. The right to life is the freedom to pursue, free means with no coercion, your life. Property is part of the pursuit of your life, because to live, you need to own stuff. You need to own the weapons to hunt. You need to be able to own the kill. You need to own the stuff you grow in your backyard, because otherwise, if you don't own it, then anybody can take it. You legitimize theft. You legitimize coercion more broadly when you reject property rights. Property is essential for human survival. It is the application of one's mind to the problem of material survival. We're material beings. We're in the material world. We have to eat. So freedom is the basic concept of no coercion. And then no coercion is applied to what? No coercion is applied to living. And property is an aspect of living. All right. Jax asked, have I thought of doing a show with John Stossel? He used to be on Fox. He's doing his own gig. I did a show with John Stossel, and he's been shopping the show he did with me. What he did was, we sat down. It's probably been a year now. We sat down and we did a long interview. And what he's done since then is he's done several short videos that includes clips from me. He did one in inequality, which included a clip from me. He did one on morality of capitalism, which included extensive clips from me. I just saw one, again, on capitalism. I think that's new, that includes some of the material from that interview. So John and I are very friendly. I know John. I don't know him well, but I've had dinner with him. I've had lunch with him. I've been to his house, and I've done many interviews with him. And he's a good guy, and I'm sure he'll want to interview me again because he got a lot of good material from the first interview. So I expect you'll see me on future John Stossel videos, but it's not like he interviews me every time. He does a bunch of interviews and then he organizes them into videos. And I'm sure we'll do that again at some point here. Is capitalism a political system or just economic? How about government management of nuclear power? Capitalism is not just an economic system. It is a social, political system. The economics flow out of that. It is the system of individual rights. It is the system in which the government protects those rights and does nothing else, in which all property is privately owned. A system in which there's a separation of state from economics. And it's a system in which, from an economics perspective, the government has no involvement in the economy. Should the government manage nuclear power? Absolutely not. I mean, what a catastrophe. See, I need your help again. What was the nuclear power plant that busted in Ukraine, in the Soviet Union? Chernobyl. That's Chernobyl. The last thing you want is for government to have any involvement in nuclear power. The only role government would have in nuclear power is that given the risks involved, you could imagine that government would have some kind of minimal signing off on, okay, it's okay to build here, it doesn't pose a real threat to the people around, right? But that should be minimal unless there's some reason to fear. But if you had true private enterprise, and if you got rid of all the regulations that exist today, and if you had real private nuclear power plants, then, wow, I mean, you would have hundreds of them today. They would be 1,000 times more efficient. Fukushima is a good example of an old power plant that should have gone out of commission, that in spite of all the government regulations had a really basic design flaw. That is, the backup power generation was below sea level or below where a tsunami would reach it, so it was susceptible to being flooded. A real simple design flaw, and that was necessary. So that prevented the cores from cooling. Even though Fukushima was such a disaster, very few people died. The actual disaster was very minimal. That's the worst you can get for nuclear power. But imagine if over the last 30 years, we'd been developing and deploying new, modern, hyper-efficient, powerful nuclear power plants. They would have replaced Fukushima. Fukushima was old. It would have been shut down a long time ago if you'd had something to replace it with. 28 people, somebody says, died in Fukushima. That's nothing compared to the hysteria and the panic that was generated from it. Right? I don't know where you get the 7 million die each year from fossil fuels. I don't know where that number comes from at all, but thousands of people die from, or hundreds of people die from solar and from wind. I don't know very many people who die from fossil fuels. Let's see. I mean, think about all the lives saved from fossil fuels. Hundreds of millions of lives saved by fossil fuels. People who wouldn't be alive today if not for cheap energy, which means fossil fuels. All right, emotionalism is poisoning the debate on both sides. It's the fear amplifier versus those reacting to them by denying that there's anything to fear. Absolutely. So you're seeing emotionalism across the board. Everybody today, everybody, is an absolutely out-and-out emotionalist on both sides of this debate, left and right. And it's what's killing. There's no rational debate. There's no objectivity. There's no seeking the truth and seeking facts. It's my political hysteria versus your political hysteria, my version of the facts versus your version of the facts, my personal experiences versus your personal experience. There's no attempt to seek the truth among, I mean, no attempt is an exaggeration, among many, many people. Most of the debates I see, there's no truth seeking. There's yelling. What do you think of the surge in gun sales? You always get a surge in gun sales when there's uncertainty and fear of economic collapse. You saw that in 08, 09. You saw that, I think it even happened in the late 90s, early 2000s when you had Asian financial crisis and then dot-com bubble crash, and of course after 9/11. So I think anytime you get fear, you get uncertainty, you get gun sales going up. It's sad because it indicates that we don't trust the stability of civilization and that we don't trust our law enforcement agencies to keep us safe. Why does the moral character of the president matter? I'm sorry, I'm laughing at this question because, I mean, I'm not laughing at you, but the question is ridiculous. The moral character of everybody matters. Because what is moral character? Moral character is what determines the choices people make. It's the value system, and it's the method of thinking that a person has. It's what determines what they will do or won't do in times of crisis or emergency or in everyday life. It determines whether they will be a fearmonger, an emotionalist, whether they will be competent, whether they will not be. Character is about how you think, how you act, how you conduct yourself. And that's important for everybody. I don't want to work for a boss who has a bad character. I don't have friends who have bad characters. I certainly wouldn't have a romantic relationship with somebody that has a bad character, who can't use their mind well, and who acts in dishonest, disrespectful, bad ways. It's bad for everybody. But for the President of the United States, who carries with him a suitcase that could launch a nuclear war, who makes decisions that affect all of our lives, that can prevent a pandemic from causing mass death or not, depending on the decisions he makes, that can command respect of the people who work for him, and therefore they execute and they do the right things, or command disdain from the people who work around him, and therefore they hedge, they don't commit, they don't act, they don't execute, and bad stuff happens. Character is everything. Far more important than your actual beliefs, particularly in the world today, when nobody believes anything, really. They're all a bunch of pragmatists playing to their political bases. So I'm much more interested right now, given the choices we have, in character than I am in positions. Because the damage you could do is much greater. For example, this pandemic. I've said many times, and I've backed it up with lots of evidence, that this has been mishandled by the federal government, by Trump, by the CDC, by the FDA. But much of that goes back to Trump, marginalizing the CDC, his narcissism, not allowing them to have a voice, not listening to them, not paying attention to them, being focused constantly on how he looks, how he appears, how he is presented to the public, and not on the facts, on reality, on evidence, on what needs to be done. Somebody with a narcissistic, totally pragmatic view of the world cannot function effectively, particularly not in times where you need to be cool, when you need cool-headed, when you need to be rational, when you need to be focused, and when you need to rally people around you to solve a problem. So it's not like Trump should have had all the answers to how to deal with the pandemic. What a good president would have done is got the best minds in the country into a room. Whether they were Democrats, Republicans, whether they were green, blue, red, or purple. and asked them what needed to be done. And then he should have got the best people into the room, whether they were generals or CEOs or heads of government agencies, the best people who could execute in the world, and told them, okay, here's the plan, execute. And it would be nice, but above what I typically would expect of a president, to actually have a political theorist, a political philosophy with him to say, well, given all this, what is the role of government and what should I do and what shouldn't I do? But that's okay, that's too much to expect in the world we live in today. But within the bounds of what presidents do today, there's so much that could have been done if the person had good character. And Trump has the opposite. The biggest problem with Trump is he has no character. That is, he doesn't care about the truth. It's not just that he lies. All politicians lie. He doesn't care about the truth. He doesn't care about reality. He doesn't care about America. He doesn't care about doing a good job vis-a-vis America. He cares about his base. He cares about appearing to do a good job. He cares about what they think about him. He cares about his ratings on television. And as a consequence, he makes bad decisions over and over and over again. And once in a while, he'll make a good decision. But it's an accident. It has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with seeking truth. It has everything to do with the fact that once in a while, he's going to make a good decision, maybe because an advisor whispered the right thing in his ear at the right point in time. And yes, I can make a list of all the, quote, good things Trump has done. But they're not being done for any right reason. And the damage is far, far greater. And there is another aspect of this. Ayn Rand talks about this in a controversial essay she wrote about why she believed a woman wouldn't want to be president and she wouldn't vote for a woman to be president. Although I'd be curious what she would think today, given some of the choices we have. And that is that the president of the United States obviously has this massive responsibility, obviously have this massive power, more power than any other human being on the planet, because he has at his disposal the mightiest military, the mightiest economy, the greatest resources that any political leader in the world has. The way the people respond to crises is going to depend on whether they look up to this person, whether they respect him. Put aside admire and agree with him, but just respect him or not. One of the problems in electing people with bad character, and it's not just Trump, although Trump is the worst of them, but Obama and Clinton, is that the country had no respect for the president. And in times of crisis, again, the president had no ability to rally the country. And if something difficult needs to be passed, let's say, for example, if you wanted, as a Republican, you wanted to appeal Obamacare, Trump had no ability to rally the country around his agenda of repealing Obamacare. No ability. Because half the country, more than half the country, doesn't trust him. They don't just disagree. It's not, I'd say even a bigger portion of that. Because I know more people who agree with him than trust him. So there's a huge percentage of the American population that don't trust Trump. I mean, Mark mentions Ronald Reagan had respect. Yes, I think Ronald Reagan had respect. Even his opponents respected him. Because he had this respectability about him. He was a human being. You agree with him or disagree, and I think he made some horrific mistakes. And remember, Ayn Rand didn't vote for him. But he was a real human being that had an agenda, was authentic and was trying to do his best for the country and loved the country, truly loved the country. None of that exists with Trump. So if Trump tomorrow said, I really do think we should open up everything. And I think what you should do, though, is I think you should voluntarily socially distance. I think businesses should take on responsibility of doing that. And I think everybody needs to take this on seriously, and we need to make a real effort as a country to beat this thing, and we need to do it by voluntary actions. I think there's a big portion of the population would say, Trump, that weirdo, who cares what he said? We don't believe half of what he said, and he doesn't know what he says half the time. Why should we do what he says? No respect. No respect. You could have disagreed with FDR about almost everything he did. But I think when World War II happened, the country rallied around him, not in some false sense of patriotism, but you got a sense that this was a war that he was going to really fight, that he was going to do the right thing, and he was seeking victory. And yes, all the stuff in the New Deal was horrible, and the country would suffer for it for generations. But right now, as the country faced this massive threat, he was a kind of person as much as you disagreed with him philosophically, he had a decent character. I mean, I don't think he had a great character, but he had a decent character, and people could respect him. I think Ronald Reagan had that kind of respect. I think other presidents, even Eisenhower had it, and I hate Eisenhower. I can't find, he's as a human being, as a general, and as a president, I despise him. But he had a certain, he was a human being. So what Trump has done, and it's a point I was trying to get to earlier, but it didn't, is he's diminished the role of the president. So not only is it now that we don't trust him, I think we're going to be cynical about presidents for a long, long time. I think we're going to expect the worst of presidents for a long, long time. I think that more and more people are coming to the conclusion character doesn't matter, and that is going to lead to a disaster across the board. Because Trump is not the last president we'll have with bad character. I think we're going to get more like Trump, not less. Worse than Trump, if that's possible, imaginable. So things are going to get worse because he has diminished the importance of character, diminished the role of president as this respected leader to such an extent that nobody cares about character anymore. I mean, it amazes me. Republicans who, during the Clinton years, said, character matters. It's all about character. The same conservatives right now are saying, character doesn't matter. What matters are policies. That's all that matters. Oh, that stuff we said in the 90s? Who cares about that? No, they were right back then. And the biggest problem with Clinton, much more problematic in my view than his policies, which overall were not that disastrous, given other presidents, was the fact that Clinton was one of those presidents who really diminished the presidency, who really was untrusted, unrespected, disrespected. You know, he slept, he had sex in a closet in the White House with Monica Lewinsky. He was just sleazy. And the whole country knew it. And we've been going downhill since then. All right, 3 last questions. Healthcare is not a right, but it seems that it could be considered a right if people believe their lives belong to the state or slave master. I mean, people can consider anything a right. But the question is, what is a right? And healthcare, I mean, there's a sense in which healthcare is a right, and I'll get to that, but healthcare is not a right in a sense that you can't have a claim against somebody else's labor. You can't have a claim against somebody else's life. You don't have a right to somebody else's time and resources. And therefore, healthcare cannot be a right. A right is your freedom to pursue your values rationally without exploiting others, without using force on others, without violating others' rights. As soon as you make healthcare a right, you're violating the rights of doctors, nurses, drug companies, everybody else who provides the service. They now become your slaves. Not literally, but in that aspect of their life, yeah. They have to serve you. They have to treat you because it's your right. What about their rights? So no, healthcare is not a right. The sense in which healthcare is a right is that you have a right to pursue healthcare. That is, you have a right to go to the doctor of your choosing if he's willing to accept you, if you can come to mutually acceptable trade. You have a right to pursue whatever drugs you want if you can get the owner of those drugs to sell them to you and a doctor to treat you with them. It's up to you and the producer. It's you have a right to negotiate. You have a right to transact. You have a right to trade. And healthcare is just one more trade that we engage in. So healthcare as a right means trading healthcare services is a right, and that's true. And property rights over healthcare is a right, and that's true. But a right to healthcare, that can never be a right. And it doesn't matter. If you think you are a property of the state, you are wrong. And that is an evil position that must be, we must shun. All right. It's the government's duty to provide protection. But can the government license its responsibility of military out to private entities? What is the moral argument for private military? I don't know a moral argument for private military. I would argue no. There should be no private militaries. And in that sense, I am against the outsourcing of prisons. I am against a privatization of prisons. I'm against the privatization of, military contractors. I'm against all of that. It is the sole the government has the monopoly over the use of force. Now, I think it's okay to have like security forces internally that are small, that have delimited responsibility. But once you get to tanks and whole military divisions and stuff like that, once you privatize that, you are creating real potential conflicts, real dangers, real enemies that could rise up. You're creating the potential of real anarchy. And as you know, I view anarchy as though probably the worst state of affairs for mankind. So I think it's too easy for it to get out of hand. Government should own these things. It's their responsibility, not own them in the sense of property, own them in the sense of responsibility. And they should have complete control over the defense of the country and any military operations. They should have complete control over policing, even though at a certain level security could be privatized. And they should have complete control over, I think, prisons. I mean, there are all kinds of problems that private prisons create that I'm not going to get into now. Some future super chat you can ask me about. Why would someone believe that freedom is anarchy? Well, because it's a tempting mind game. I kind of understand them, right? It's tempting to say, and they miscategorize what freedom is, right? So they agree with the leftists that freedom is whatever you feel like. Freedom is the getting your whims, getting whatever you want. There's no accident, by the way, that most anarchists are inspired by Murray Rothbard's kind of subjectivist moral philosophy, to the extent that you call it a philosophy, but subjectivist moral view. They just want whatever they want. I want to own a tank. I don't like these laws. I want different laws. I want to do this. I just want. And therefore freedom means to them just wanting stuff, whatever. And then they go, but wait a second, if we had a government that passed laws, that would restrict me, and there's certain things that I want that I couldn't do. That's not acceptable. That's limiting my freedom. But no, it's making possible your freedom. Objective law's purpose is to make freedom possible, because freedom necessitates the elimination of coercion. And to do that, you have to have clear definitions of things like the limitations of what are property rights, how to define them, how to, what is and what isn't, how do you enforce those? It's complicated. What is appropriate evidence in a court of law? All of those kind of things are what preserve freedom, are what preserve the absence of coercion and your positive ability to go out and pursue your life, go out and pursue your values. Without them, you're at the whim of whoever has a bigger weapon than you do. I mean, that's a short answer to what could be a much longer discussion about anarchy. Do Sanders and AOC have character? No, I mean, I certainly don't think Bernie Sanders has any character. I don't think he would garner any respect. He is a lying, deceiving, evasive, snarky weasel of a creature. I mean, if the photos of him in the Soviet Union and his praise of Cuba and his praise of of Chavez in Venezuela do not freak you out, then I don't know what does. So no, it's the only possibility of contemplating a Bernie Sanders presidency is because we got Donald Trump. Donald Trump has so diminished the presidency that people can even imagine a Bernie Sanders there. But it would be horrific, and it would be disgusting. And he has absolutely no character. I think AOC is the same. She's younger. She's, less experienced. She hasn't done as many ridiculous, stupid things as Bernie Sanders have. I think she will grow up to be as bad as Bernie Sanders, but she's not in the same category because I give a pass to people who are a little younger on some of these things. But she is accumulating a set of points of view, a set of ideas that are so despicable and go so much against the grain of truth. And she is so willing to bend that truth and to evade and to... of course she doesn't have character, although I don't think... I've said this many times. I don't think she's stupid. I think she's quite smart. I think she's a good debater. I think she's fast on her feet. And I think she is... I don't think she's a puppet. I think that's wrong when you watch her in interviews, and she is very quick with her answers, and she's got the right answers. If she's a puppet, she's being very well trained, much better trained than anybody I know who has the capacity to train. So, she makes idiotic comments that seem idiotic to us, but because they're wrong. But that's true of everybody on the left. And yet, I don't think that's an issue of being smart or not. She's also very inexperienced. She's still young. She's still going to get better at communicating. She's going to gain more experience. We'll see. We'll see. I've seen her answer questions from the right. I've seen her answer questions from tough reporters that are challenging her. I've seen her do very well with the kind of question, but how are you going to pay for that? And you said it's this number. You're way underestimating. I've seen people push her on these things, and I have to say, she's good at responding. I think Bernie's good at responding too. Again, the fact that you're good at responding to questions and you're quick on your feet, I don't think Bernie's an idiot. I think Bernie's very smart. I think AOC is very smart. Doesn't make them right. I don't know why people are so fixated on labeling them as stupid. I just don't think it's helpful. I think quite the contrary. We should assume they're really smart and figure out how to beat them, how to crush them, how to make better arguments, much better arguments, and how to beat them at their own game. That, I think, should be our focus. I can't stomach watching her. I can't stomach watching Obama. I used to turn off the television as soon as he came on. My wife would start yelling from the other room if she heard his voice. And exactly the same thing is happening with Trump. Exactly the same thing. I cannot watch him. I will not watch him on television. I watch him on YouTube later when I need to, or if I need to. I can't stand his voice. I can't stand his face. But that's Obama. That's true of Obama. It's true of Trump. It's true of AOC. It's true of Bernie Sanders. I try to read their speeches because I hate them so much. I read it because watching them is so violently offensive to me. All of these people. So, but they're all the same, right? So, you won't see a television in my household with any of these people on it. All televisions do not do news. They do not do press conferences. They don't. I'll read the data afterwards. It's so less emotional. It's so less upsetting. It's so less, in your face. And these people, their evil soul is reflected in the ugliness of their way they express themselves. And even though, by common standard, AOC is not ugly. She's actually got, if you didn't know who she was, she's kind of pretty. But she is ugly to me now. Right? And that is true of Trump and Obama and all these guys. Clinton, I never understood what Clinton's appeal was to women, why women liked Clinton. He's always appeared to me because of his character. He is ugly. I never understood why people thought he was charismatic because of his character. Character matters. All right. Thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show today. We covered a lot. I think hopefully you got something out of it. Let's see. Show probably tomorrow. If not, then Saturday, certainly on Sunday. We will see. Don't forget to like the show, share the show. And if you like the content, if you're getting something out of the content, then, I'd really appreciate the support. I thank you for all of those who support me, whether it's through Super Chat, whether it's through Patreon, Subscribestar, or on my website, yaronbrookshow.com/support. You can support me in any one of those ways. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. Have a good rest of the week. And stay safe and stay healthy. Bye.